Governments are very often judged on what they consider to be a flagship policy, how that flagship policy goes, when it gets implemented, and really ultimately the end results of that flagship policy. And one of the very core pillars of Boris Johnson's, at least, government that he was elected on in 2019 was the idea and the pillar of levelling up. But as also, as we've discussed many, many times before, he was also elected for the idea of Global Britain. And as we've said before, if you want to level up the country, that involves serious investment into these places that have been left behind. And we're talking serious investment. We're talking billions. But as we've already discussed before, the Town Prosperity Fund is a complete joke. The money that is being given, while it is, again, a lot of money to sort of you or I, when it comes to sort of spreading it out and how it's being dished out by these towns and areas and cities having to bid for it, meaning that they are now having to essentially compete against each other, it's completely pathetic. When the EU one was, right, here's the lists of need. You need money, you need money, you need money, you need money. And they would just go down the list depending on obviously that need. And of course, there were extra pots of money that they could apply for, do projects with, and everything like that. But when money was needed, it was given. And the idea of Tories just handing out money to those who might need it most was quite frankly farcical. We saw when the table came out, Rishi Sunak's constituency in Darlington doesn't really need the money. One of the richest constituencies in the UK apparently needed all this levelling up money. And yet, as we always said, levelling up versus Global Britain. Levelling up needs, again, as we said, serious investment. You need to at least engage in some level of protectionism to protect British manufacturing and industry and farming and all these industries that rely now on being outside and open to sort of global competition. And then, of course, you have Global Britain, the exact opposite of what levelling up stands for. And as we always said, the more and more they champion Global Britain, the more that undermines levelling up. And it makes so many of those Tory promises look like a complete joke. Remember when the Hull by-election happened not too long ago? What were some of the reactions we were seeing from the people questioned? Okay, Boris, I voted for you. Now give us the money. And of course, at the moment, levelling up is nowhere to be seen at all. So with that in mind, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a rotational link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel that way. And of course, down below, there are links to my YouTube thank you button and of course, the YouTube subscription as well. So let's go diving on into this and find out a bit more about why the Tories have suddenly abandoned what is or what was their flagship policy. So with that, we go over to The Guardian with the title of "Riven by Scandal and Division, the Tories have all but abandoned levelling up." Amid the scandal, the farce and disarray enveloping Boris Johnson's government, one sudden and glaring absence seems to have been rather overlooked. Levelling up was endlessly talked about between 2019 and early 2022. It was hailed as the daring Tory stride into Labour territory, honouring what a renamed ministry commanded by Michael Gove, and something of a very unconvincingly explained in the 330-page white paper that was finally published back in February. Of course, we've seen that, how badly that was. It was all, shall we say, all talk, not enough money, and of course, no policy to back it up either. And of course, back then, Johnson insisted that levelling up remained his defining mission. But only 3 months on, ministers barely even used the term. It received only the most glaring mention at the tail end of Rishi Sunak's spring statement, and it was effectively absent from the pre-Easter governmental update that Johnson gave to the House of Commons about a fortnight ago, assuring MPs that of his regrets about Partygate and, of course, his determination to get on with the job, whatever that is. Though the idea, of course, is not quite dead, it now seems to have lost so much urgency and substance that it is quickly withering away. Much of that explanation seems to be centred on Sunak and the Treasury, and of course the battle with Gove that was settled in the Chancellor's favour. There is also talk of the Westminster and other ministers from other MPs from the newly empowered Tory right successfully pushing away an agenda that embodied the kind of economic interventionism that they always were dead against. For all the mockery thrown at Gove and his new department, some of his ideas and analysis are actually sound enough. And we've said before, when you look at that, some of what was said in the white paper about leveling up, there being no industrial strategy, no investment, no cause or policies to sort of support the idea of doing this. They were right on the money, but they're just not interested in naturally following through on their promise. But of course, without money and political support, which was again the two main things that it was missing, that does not obviously count for very much at all. Worse still, a prime minister who was never really interested in the detail and consistency is now mired in panic and derision. Small wonder that his government is supporting a big crusade has now shriveled into more of an afterthought. Developments that highlight the story are now piling up. From the start, there have been clear signs that even small levelling up measures have not really been aimed at the places that actually needed them. Earlier this year, researchers from the University of West London found that 61% of England's most deprived areas had not been allocated any money from the £480 billion worth of the Levelling Up Fund. Again, of course, and it went to places like Rishi Sunak's constituency. Again, they don't exactly need it there. There are other places that desperately need it, and they didn't give them it. 2 weeks ago, it was also revealed that the government scheme designed to replace the targeting funding from the EU that will leave the regions of England almost 80 million a year worse off. The proposed high-speed train line from Birmingham to Leeds, and of course a new rail link with the latter city and Manchester were cancelled late last year. And now we learn that there are 79 areas of England that have applied for money to improve their Nutchmead local bus services, and only 34 will actually receive financial help. The City of Liverpool region had asked for £667 million, but were only getting a piffling 12 million. And although South Yorkshire requested 474 million, it is not even going to receive a penny. And again, they need this money. And as we've talked about before, when it comes to sort of governments investing in this money, they get it back in taxes, investments, and all kinds of different ways. But this is just not in the Tory DNA. They are against, pardon me, they are against any kind of this economic interventionism or getting involved in the economy or even building basic infrastructure that would, again, help improve the economy, because they are ideologically opposed to it. And we've said this from day one. Why on earth are these Tories who continuously talk about how amazing Global Britain is and saying all this wonderful stuff that it can do, while secretly, again, all that stuff that Global Britain would do would dramatically undermine the whole policy for levelling up? In the Queen's speech due on the 10th of May, there will reportedly be a new levelling up and regeneration bill, though no one seems to be actually expecting much from it. The largely vague mission set out in the white paper pledged a deadline of about 2030, and about regional imbalances in jobs, investment, home ownership, and even life expectancy are expected to be given somewhat of an ambiguous legal force. And there are very much likely to be plans for some new devolution based around mayors. The advanced briefings have also promised new laws whereby landlords will be forced to let out rental units that have been vacant for longer than 6 months. Not a bad idea, but hardly indicative of the thorough local renewal that Johnson and his colleagues had once hinted at. Beyond the very small scale regeneration projects most people can now seemingly hope for is a very anticlimactic utopia of warm words, pop-up shops, and new local figureheads who may try to make the most of very limited powers while Whitehall and Westminster retain the whip hand. And that is the main key thing. We've seen what can happen when local mayors get that money and they actually start doing stuff. We've seen Andy Burnham do fantastic stuff up in Manchester. Dan Jarvis has set up an office that helps people set up socially owned businesses, or businesses transition to a socially owned business model, and the workers own that business. There is no other type of unit like that in the rest of the UK, but we have one here in South Yorkshire. That is something we can be proud of that we have done. And of course, the worrying thing, if the Conservative guy gets in, he is committed to closing it, which is why we have to make sure that the Labour guy gets in so that can continue. Or at least we do recognise if maybe the Lib Dems or the Greens get in, that they at least continue that as well, because again, it's good that we have that. So anyway, we'll continue this article. So meanwhile, one of the most glaring imbalances of power still cries out for serious attention. With a new financial year freshly started and this week's council elections looming, Johnson recently told the Commons that everywhere you look at a Labour administration, it's a bankrupt shambles. This is completely untrue. Indeed, the first of the small handful of councils to so far have declared themselves bankrupt was a Tory-run Northamptonshire, while the other Conservative administrations have come close. And also, valid proof that the government will still not take responsibility for the endless local crises caused by over 12 years of cuts in funding from Whitehall. After more than 10 years of savings, the Tory-run Stoke-on-Trent is now in the midst of over £10 million worth of cuts. In Leeds, the figure is 16 million. Liverpool is still trying to plug the gap of £24.5 million. And of course, mention levelling up to most of the council leaders, including the Tories, and you will be usually met with either snorts of derision or a quiet kind of bafflement. The rise and fall of levelling up is really a story about conservatism, Brexit, and an increasingly incapability of the inescapable tension between the people Johnson and his colleagues now claim to speak for and their new own ideological tastes. Brexit re-energised their party. It brought the Prime Minister to power and then won him the support of the traditional Labour voters, who sincerely believed he might actually follow through on this boosterism, and he had the voice before the referendum. The 350 million a week for the NHS and all that. And of course, the charges in place were live and for years after decline. But in Westminster, our own departure from the EU has also enabled the kind of Tory neo-Thatcherites who saw Brexit as a chance to reaffirm the small state, low spending credo that they were never, ever going to give up. And we've said that time and time again. You may remember 2016, if you vote this in, you will hand over effectively more control to the most right-wing Tories there are. And we have seen that, because even Johnson at the 2019 election purged a lot of the moderate Tories. And it is suspected that once again, if he should win his vote of no confidence and go for an early election in this autumn, he may very well have another purge of more rebel MPs who he sees as a threat, and that would enable him to bring in more, well, crazy right-wing Tory libertarians. So again, something we have to bear in mind. A more substantial leader than Johnson might have obviously tried to resolve that tension by facing such people down. But the small staters won, and we know they won very much. Like I say, they're all pretty much on the front bench. They're the ones who wrote Britannia Unchained. And of course, any halfway convincing ideas about levelling up were among the casualties. For plenty of Conservative MPs, this is probably a cause for celebration. But in the very much disadvantaged parts of the West Midlands, the post-industrial Lancashire, Old Derbyshire coalfield, and the rest of the so-called Red Wall, it will probably amount to no less reason to be interested in politics and any other boost for the same fearing dissatisfaction that led to Brexit. As much of any switch between parties, turnout in this week's elections will be a very useful indicator for how people in such places are starting to feel. And again, something we're watching out for later this evening. Such are the perils of politics in such as the Prime Minister, as cynically raising people's hopes and then leaving them hanging in a desperately dangerous behaviour, and then often the consequences for those whole politicians. Yet there is one glimmer of hope. Even if the government disregards its supposed flagship agenda, huge questions about regional inequality, deindustrialization, and where power lies are now beginning to be talked about. And in the right hands, they could be answered with the kind of ideas about new green jobs, radically improved transport, thought through devolution, and of course the reinvention of higher education and much more besides. For the Tories, levelling up may go the way of David Cameron's short-lived Big Society. Talked it one day and then blithely binned the next. Labour, by contrast, could very much seize the initiative if only it could brandish the current air of the smallness and caution and realise what Johnson's retreat means, a hugely potential historic opportunity. And I agree with what's said in this article. I've been saying this, I don't know how long, I've been saying this. There is a massive opportunity here for Labour to really go in and sink the Tories where they lie. This massive retreat that Johnson has done away from levelling up gives huge opportunities to Labour to really put forward some serious ideas. And Keir Starmer needs to listen to the likes of Ed Miliband. Because Ed Miliband said it very clearly. When he was leader, he tiptoed. He had policies and stuff that he thought he wanted to really do, but he was not brave enough to put them forward. He was worried about that reaction. But afterwards, he's been coming out with some really good stuff. Just go and look up the stuff that he's done in like the past 2 or 3 years of what he said and stood up in Parliament and said, and come out since then and said, look, we need to think big, we need to think brave, and we need to strike. He is right on that. Labour needs to be more bold. It needs to be confident in its ideas. We know these ideas are true, tried and tested, and are popular. But we need to really, shall we say, take the bats to the legs of the Tory party and just start hitting and whacking them. And we can win, and we can cause a massive rout because they've already run off from many of these areas. And we can win. We just have to be brave to do it. And this is why I've said before, why, you should be a member of the Labour Party if you believe and you think this way. You can push for this stuff from within the party. I say it every time when this comes up, you can get more stuff done when you've got one foot in the doorway rather than both feet outside. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one foundation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.